So, for this week, we'll do 7 days of this 7 a.m. morning sitting, and go through Saturday and Sunday as well, because on this weekend, starting Thursday evening, I'm teaching a retreat, and so just fold in this 7 a.m. sitting into the retreat into this sitting. And so there's a kind of a multi-faceted theme for this week. And so I'll introduce it this way, that the meditation practice that we do, the core of it is called insight meditation. And that's a translation of vipassana. Insight is a translation. And vipassana means to see clearly, or to see with emphasis. And in the ancient texts, vipassana is not a meditation practice, but rather it's a result of meditation practice in the form of insight. As we develop and cultivate meditation, then at some point there is a revelation that happens. And I use the word revelation because we don't have the sense that we're probing or doing the analysis. We're just seeing what's there and allowing what's there to show itself in a deep way. And there are 3 insights, and those are a deep insight into impermanence or inconstancy, a deep insight into suffering, a deep insight into not self. So that's kind of the one piece of a larger process of practice. And the idea is to get there to have these deep insights. To get to those insights, meditation practice is to cultivate ourselves, to develop ourselves in meditation in such a way that we can have those insights. And so we don't do the insights just happen as we are well, stable, focused, and clear. And so how do we cultivate ourselves? Well, maybe a little bit paradoxically, we cultivate the opposite of the 3 characteristics. We cultivate stability and stillness, so that we can see impermanence and change and inconstancy really well. We cultivate happiness and well-being, as we talked about last week, so that we can have the capacity to really have deep insight, a capacity to really be able to look at suffering, be with suffering in a very deep way without it being a negative experience. And then we cultivate something that can be called in English something like self-confidence, efficacy, and this sense of strong confidence, self-confidence, that allows us to see what is called not self. So that's what we cultivate. Now, why do we cultivate these, and why we cultivate these to have the insights? And why do we cultivate the insights? We have the insights in order to bring the mind to a place, to a time where the mind has no fixations. It's not fixating on wanting something or resisting anything or fixating on desires, aversions, fixated on delusions and ideas and fears. And often the mind is fixated. It's kind of focused about something and really is stuck there or wants that or is that in ways that we don't really begin to see until we start calming and settling the mind deeper and deeper and deeper. Then at some point we'll notice that the mind keeps being preoccupied. There's a tension, a momentum, a holding pattern in the mind. And some of this is really almost below the level of thinking, and the very kind of attachment or fixation to being alive or being a self, or even things like being safe. There's or having opinions or holding on to stories. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with those things, but there's no freedom with a mind fixated. So the purpose of seeing these deep insights into inconstancy, suffering, and not self is so the mind can release its fixations. And to do that very deeply brings the mind to something that Buddhist tradition calls the 3 doors of liberation. And those 3 doors are those are the doors that lead to the mind letting go in a deep way, letting go of its deepest fixations. So liberation, awakening. And those 3 doors are the doors, and there's a little bit, I'll explain this, the doors of the signless, the door of the wishless, and the door of emptiness. So the signless is the door where we no longer fixate on any of the projections we have on reality around us. And certainly the more abstract or complicated projections we have about people and bias and prejudice and judgments we have. But also the simplest projections, even the projection on something like a door, that it's a door, or a chair, that it's a chair. In the way the chairs function in our society, it's a completely appropriate and some degree accurate idea that we apply to this piece of furniture that we call a chair. But if you brought that to people, 50,000 years ago on this planet, those people maybe wouldn't know it was a chair. They would be unsure of what it was. Maybe they thought it was a stepping stool to get up to the fruit in the tree. They wouldn't occur to them maybe that it was a chair. But we see it that way. So there's a very, very, even the simplest forms of attributing concepts to things can be a fixation. And so when the mind is no longer projecting anything, that's called the signless. And to get the mind to the point where it's relaxed and still enough, open enough, safe enough, peaceful enough, that it's not making any projections on anything at all, then something can release. And there's something about seeing in constancy, impermanence, that we realize that the more we see things constantly changing, the more we see they don't fit. The projections don't quite work. And so the projecting mind can finally release or relax. The wishless is when we experience suffering. We see that the unsatisfactory nature, that the degree of stress or tension that's somehow inherent in so many things, even the smallest movement of the mind, surprisingly. To really see that, and see that from a place of happiness, but to really see it, then the ways in which we get fixated on the pursuit of happiness or fixated on our suffering releases. And then something very deep can let go. And then to really see something about how things are not self, the not self characteristic of phenomena. And I'll talk more about that later. But that is I think it's fair to most people understand how much fixation human beings have on themselves, on self. To start have a lot of self-confidence, to cultivate that, so that there's enough self-confidence one can begin to let go of the fixation on self. And when the mind stops that fixation, for some people that's the door they step through for a deeper liberation. And so that's liberation. So there's what we cultivate, there's what we see, and there's the doors to freedom. And then that's followed by how we live in the world. And each of these three doors can open to a different benefit for living in a good, wonderful way in the world. But for now, I want to say that there are these, so there's 4 different kind of steps in this larger process. And that could be summarized in a little ditty, a little kind of saying. First, you be. Then you see. Next, you free. Finally, you are we. So first you be, you become someone who's stable, has sense of well-being, and confidence. First you be. Then you see. You see the 3 insights of inconstancy, suffering, and not self. Then you free. You step through the doors of liberation. The mind settles very deeply. The doors of signless, wishless, and emptiness. And then you're we. Then the solid barrier, solid walls between self and other dissolve. And the concern and care and love for the whole world becomes much more natural and part of an expression of that freedom that comes. Because how could there be freedom without that freedom opening us up to care about the world around us? So that's the kind of overarching overview of some of what will happen this week. And then I will, and some of this will happen at the retreat, and I'll arrange to have those talks also posted together with this series, so that those of you who want to have easy access to the whole thing, or some of these retreat talks will happen not during the 7 a.m. sitting, and so if you want the whole package, it'll be easily accessible for you in other ways, and I'll talk more about that later. So I hope that this is nice for you, and in these first days of this week, I will talk mostly about the 3 doors of liberation. So in a sense, we're starting with the advanced teaching as the background, as the direction we're going in practice. And then for the retreat, I'm going to talk about the cultivation, the being, what we develop, and the insights. So, someone asked a question, signless or sightless? Signless, no signs. So no projections of concepts, ideas, is what the signless is. So I look forward to continuing this theme over the next days. Thank you.